Folks, welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on Emerging Futures, the latest international student recruitment insights. We have a number of people still joining us, but before we properly get started, I'll just make a few opening remarks. But my name is Jamie Arrowsmith. I am Director of Universities UK International, and I'll be your chair for today's session. IDP's work has long been a really important resource, both for individual institutions, but also for us at Universities UK as well. And I think it's been really invaluable in helping us to discern, and I think more importantly, to understand and help to understand what is happening in student recruitment, and also how the UK is perceived as a destination as well. We all know and recognise just how competitive the international recruitment landscape is. So it's really important that we have data-led insights into that operating environment and how we are perceived overseas. I'm really delighted that we're able to welcome Jonah Duffin, Director of External Relations at IDP, to talk us through the latest findings and insights from the Emerging Futures series. But not only that, we'll also be joined by two people who I'm sure will need very little introduction to most of you joining us today. First, we'll have Bobby Mehta, Associate Pro Vice Chancellor for Global at the University of Portsmouth and Chair of Wheeler, and also Jacqui Jenkins, Global Programme Lead for International Student Mobility at the British Council. Jacqui and Bobby will really help us to think through the implications of the research that Jonah will outline. And so collectively as a panel, we'll then start to consider both the challenges, but also some of the opportunities that lie ahead. We have a large number of delegates that have registered to join us today. And I do encourage colleagues to post any questions for the panel on the Q&A tab as we'll move to a discussion after the opening presentation. So thank you to everyone who's joining us today for what I'm sure is going to be a really interesting and insightful presentation, but also a discussion as well. So without further ado, I'll invite Jonah to present the latest from the Emerging Futures series. Jonah, please.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Thank you for the introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to initially, for about 15-20 minutes, take you through our latest Emerging Futures research. Now, it's Emerging Futures 3, because we've been carrying out this research every 6 months for the last 18 months. And prior to that, we called it our Crossroads research, which tracked student sentiment and motivations throughout the time of COVID and the pandemic, and has now morphed into a much wider piece of research. So I'm not going to take you through all the findings. We'd be here for about 2 hours if I did, but we're going to concentrate on what I think are a few key aspects for the UK, and that will help introduce a good discussion and debate at the end. Before I get into the meat of the findings, it's just worth very quickly going through the methodology so everyone's aware of how we gather the data and where it comes from. I think it gives a useful context for the data. So first of all, it's around a 15-minute survey, and we administer it both English and in Chinese, and we conducted it towards the end of February into mid-March. The only real sort of policy or important implication in that date range possibly is that during that time Australia announced the extension to some of its post-study work rights, so may have had some influence on students, as that was in the press at the same time as the survey was in the field. And just in terms of the respondent profile, a few key points to point out. It was our largest ever survey. So it had just over 21,000 students respond. They were in various states of their journey into higher education. So that sort of teal green pie chart in the top left, you can see that we had just under a fifth that were currently studying as international students in one of the major English language speaking destinations. We had just over a third who are prospective, so they haven't yet applied. And then we had 43 who were in the application process and towards international study. And in terms of study level, just under 60% were intending or already studying at postgraduate level, and a quarter at undergraduate level. And then we had a really good spread of different countries in which we were able to get the views, and so we can slice and dice the data. The big ones: Nigeria, India, China, Ghana, and then just around 900 from the Philippines, and so on. You can see them there on the screen. So a really good pool in which to understand what students are thinking in terms of their international study. So let's get into some of the data. This is a question that we've asked throughout all of the surveys, and it's which is your first choice destination? Where are you thinking of wanting to study? And Canada has, throughout all of the surveys, been the #1 destination of choice. It remains so in this survey, and in fact, we saw no real change in terms of the number of students wanting to study in Canada. 27% saying it was their first choice. He then got 23% saying that it was their first choice for Australia, 21 for the USA, and 18 for the UK. So the UK actually has seen a decline in the number of students picking it as their first choice, and that's due in part to the bounce back of Australia over the last 2 or 3 surveys. But in this survey in particular, it's due to an increase in the number of students picking the US as their #1 destination. There's other key aspect that to pull out of this data as well, is that just over a third, so 34% of respondents stated that they had at least 3 of those top 4 in their consideration set. So they were considering studying in at least 3 of Canada, Australia, US, and UK, which highlights the amount of competition there is, and also I think maybe surprisingly shows that up until quite a late point in the student decision-making journey, they're not necessarily committed to one destination over another, and there is ability to change and persuade and to market to students quite deep into their decision-making journey. But overall, a real competitive environment at the moment, with all of the different destinations vying for students. Australia bouncing back from their closure in COVID, and the US becoming increasingly popular. So we move on to the next slide, and this is really showing us why students are choosing those destinations as their first choice, and is really the slide that I'll use to then talk through the rest of the presentation, because I think this is where we get the really key data from. So what we've got across the top is the 5 key factors that are driving student choice, are driving the student to pick a certain destination as their #1 choice. And you can split the 4 main destinations into 2 groups, really. The first being Canada and Australia. What we see in Canada and Australia is that there's a really good spread of motivation. And by that, I mean students are picking those 2 destinations for a number of different reasons. The first set of reasons are a sort of a return on investment set of reasons, so that they get good employment opportunities after graduation. So for Canada, you've got 60% good employment opportunities after graduation, and you've got and then you've got a second set of factors, which is around how people feel, a more emotional response to choosing a destination. So safety is very highly rated for Canada, as is support for international students, as is the fact that it's welcoming of others from other countries. And we see a similar set of choice factors for Australia as well. So that safety is very high, as is the supportiveness and welcomingness of Australia. And that's something that we've seen improve for Australia since they reopened after the closure of borders during the pandemic. Then for the UK, what we see is actually a narrower sort of band of choice. So whilst the UK has more students than any of the others choosing it for the high quality of education, it's really well ranked and really well perceived in terms of quality, and something that is really hard won, and is really something that the sector should be proud of. It's really the only main factor that is driving students to choose the UK, that high quality. We actually rank quite low for all of those other aspects around being supportive, being welcoming, and being safe. But then we also rank lower than all the other destinations on the key aspects of good employment opportunities after graduation. Whereas I said Canada do so well, the USA are doing very, very well as well. And Australia is, as I said, improving in that aspect as well. So the UK, hard won, really proud to be seen as such a high quality education, but that's really quite a narrow set of deciding factors for the UK. And we see the importance of graduate employment opportunities being much stronger for the other destinations. So let's delve a little deeper into aspects of post-study work and how that's driving student choice for all of the different destination countries. So what we see is that actually post-study work as a factor in choosing a destination can really drive diversity. So I think there's a feeling that isn't data driven that the increase in the post-study work visa in the UK recently over the last couple of years has driven real interest from South Asia, which is undeniable. But I think what this research is beginning to uncover is it's also a key driver for students from a lot of other countries as well. So if we look at this slide, overall 59% of respondents said they chose their first choice destination country due to the availability of good employment opportunities. So that's the global average. And if we look across the blue bars, then we can see for Nigeria, for India, for Ghana and the Philippines, it's a higher number. So a higher percentage of students are saying that good employment opportunities after graduation are a really important factor. But we can also see for certain countries that the high quality of education is really, really important and is where possibly the UK should be doing better or is why it's doing well. So places like Indonesia, 78% of students saying high quality of education is important. India, 72%, Philippines, 76%. So these two are really, really important factors in both building diversity of demand from international students and in driving overall interest in studying in the different destination countries. So we can look at this sort of same data around the role of the post-study work visa, but we can look at it just rather than for the source countries, for the destination countries. And what we see here is that Canada, Australia are much more attractive in terms of post-study work than the UK. So UK, 52% of students, Canada and Australia up there on 64% of students. So if this is such a key factor, which the evidence suggests it is, alongside good quality of education, the UK is underperforming. It's not seen as the choice for students when it comes to choosing the UK because it's not seen as having as an attractive post-study work policy as Canada and as Australia. We can delve into that a little bit further, and we can look at perceptions that students have. So what we've uncovered so far is what's driving choice is around high quality and also around post-study work opportunities and post-study work policies. So we asked the students on a scale of 0 to 10 what their perceptions were across two key areas, and that is graduate employment opportunities. So do they think the jobs will be available to them, the suitable jobs, once they graduate from their international education? And we also asked them to rate on that 0 to 10 scale the post-study work policies. So did they think those policies would help them to get a job and were suitable for them? And what we see on the top row is those graduate employment opportunities. So Canada out of 10, 7.7 for postgraduate employment opportunities, the US 7.4, Australia 7.2, and then in fourth place, the UK on 6.8. So students aren't perceiving the opportunities available to them when they graduate in the UK anywhere near as highly as they are for Canada, and is one of the reasons why Canada is so popular and is the #1 destination of choice. We can then look at the employment opportunities, the post-study work policies, and we see again Canada rated even higher by students, 7.9. Then in second place is actually Australia in 7.2, so recognition of the much more positive policies that they have available over the last 2 years to 18 months. And then the US in third place, the UK in third place on 6.8, and then the US in fourth place, 6.7. So the interesting one here possibly is to look at the US. So the students see a buoyant economy with good employment opportunities. They don't necessarily see the policies there to match it. Whereas for the UK, it's the same on both. They don't see the opportunities or the policies to match it. So we wanted to understand a little bit about what was important in the policies and in the post-study work visas that students found attractive. And I think some of the findings here are surprising and incredibly interesting. So it was actually the opportunity to acquire work experience after they graduated that was the most important factor for students. They want the job, they want the return on investment once they graduate. That's the most important thing for the student in terms of rating the policy. Then after that, it was how easy it is for them to migrate into that job market, to switch from being a student to being an employee. And then in third place in terms of importance was the duration of the visa. So this, I think as a sector, there's been a long and hard fought lobby to extend the graduate route visa to 2 years, and we have that. You've seen Australia extend the post-study work rights by a number of years in order to attract more students. And I don't think these findings suggest that either of those things were in any way the wrong things to do, because the duration in itself is a facilitator for students to be able to get better jobs, because employers see that they're a long-term prospect, and also therefore enables easier entry into the job market. So I think that's the finding that I'm taking away from that. But I think it also suggests that there's two parallel actions that possibly people can take in order to help students' perceptions of post-study work and those opportunities available to them when they graduate to be better. And I think there's the role of the government in terms of the policy, but then there's also the role of universities and the sector to make those links with industry, to make those links with employers, and to make that progression through from being a student into employment as easy as possible for students. So I think there's action for everybody wherever they sit within the sector to be able to make improvements there. So then final slide, bringing it in exactly on the 20 minutes, is around good graduate outcomes, and what factors are important to students in understanding if an institution has good graduate outcomes. So how are students basically assessing whether this really important factor is in fact true? And I think, and the number one for students is the academic reputation of an institution. So am I going to get a high quality degree or qualification that will help me get a job? That's the most important thing for me in terms of understanding whether it gives me the opportunities that I need in employment. Then where one is available, the published graduate employment rates, and noting that they're not benchmarkable across all the different destinations and are sometimes not as easy to uncover in certain countries. Then in number 3 is the post-study work rights. Remembering the previous slide that it's not just about duration, it's about the opportunities to gain work experience and ease of entry into the employment space. And then it's the links that the institution has with industry in fourth place. So that concludes pretty much the presentation, a glimpse of some of the really rich data that we've gathered in emerging futures. And I think what I wanted to highlight and people to take away is the importance of good quality and the importance of post-study work for students in their decision making. But on this final slide, that actually they're interlinked, that good quality can lead to better graduate outcomes, and students do recognise that. But that we have to make sure that we're making that as easy and as well presented as possible to students. So thank you very much, everybody, for your attention. Jamie, I'll pass back to you.
No, thank you, Jonah, for a really rich presentation, sort of covering a lot of ground as well. As I've said, any kind of colleagues joining us online, please do pose questions in the Q&A. I think I was really struck by one of those first stats you mentioned, actually, that 1/3 of students are considering at least 3 different study destinations until quite late in their decision cycle. So not just a number of institutions within a market, but across different markets as well. And that strikes me as, just highlighting just how competitive the environment is if students haven't even settled on a country until late in the day. But and also I think that kind of what the data highlights around the importance of that safe and welcoming environment as well. Just being really, really critical to perceptions of a destination. But I guess from a UK perspective, that quality remains such an important feature of the UK's offer. It really is sort of core to our USP. But I think that final slide is really instructive, that quality itself is quite complex and multifaceted, that there are different ways of interpreting that, and actually that can reinforce things around graduate outcomes as well. So plenty in there, I think, and hopefully we'll have some time for discussion from comments from the floor. But I actually first wanted to ask our fellow panelists who are joining us today, so Bobby Mehta and Jacqui Jenkins, for their just initial thoughts and reflections on the presentation and the data that Jonah has just outlined. So Bobby, thank you for joining us. I wondered if I could just turn to you first. What are your kind of immediate reflections on the data that's just been set out?
So, look, it's funny how quickly things can change. I remember we were coming out of the pandemic, and how positive the UK's position was. I remember, Jonah, when you guys have presented from an IDP perspective, this survey previously, the UK was, at the beginning of the pandemic, quite far behind. During the pandemic, we started moving ahead. Now, post-pandemic, we're starting to lose ground again. So I think that's a concern, I think, for me. But it also shows, if we aren't responsive to what we're seeing in this surveys, because this is the future surveys, this is what's coming down the pipeline. What we've been able to achieve will start to go backwards. So that's the biggest concern I have, and I suspect that this is not about backwards in the coming cycles. This could be for the current cycle that we're in, because the issue you have with perceptions is if students, Jonah, you made a really valid point that students are, quite deep into their decision makings, haven't decided which destination they're going to. So they've still got 3 potential destinations that they may choose. They won't make decisions if there's a perception that there's an unstable environment. The UK hasn't got a clear steer on its policy. All of those types of things will create uncertainty and may affect conversion. So students may have applied to us because they're still considering 3 destinations, but they may not convert for us because of the factors that have been outlined in the survey. So those are my sort of initial sort of thoughts as a starter for 10, that this is not only pointing what could be the future for the UK if we don't make some changes, but it could affect us quite quickly as well.
No, thank you, Bobby, and that's quite a sobering thought as well. And I think what you've said around sort of responsiveness being really, really important. And I think as I think it's a comment from Jonah in his presentation, that kind of reputation is hard won and easily lost, and that's maybe what's sort of coming through now. And again, I'm sure we'll return to that issue of stability and uncertainty a little later. But Jacqui, great to have you with us as well. What stands out to you from the data that we've just seen presented? I think you're on mute.
I'm just about to share my screen there in error, but I was on mute, so sorry about that. I was going to say, firstly, it's a fantastic presentation, and because it's clear and concise about the areas of focus. Actually, looking at that presentation, the 3 areas that Study UK promotes the UK on is academic, the quality of excellence of teaching. Secondly, the employability and career prospects, and thirdly, the student experience. So the things that you're measuring in terms of country competitiveness is exactly how the UK is trying to position itself. And I think I echo Bobby, really. We can easily lose one of those if another country becomes more favourable in any one of those areas. I think it's heartening to see that we are firmly in that quality badge. And quality does mean different things, but when we turn it around to saying academic quality, quality of teaching, that is a really nice space for us to hold on to. And whatever we do moving forward, that we cannot lose. And I think that is there. That's the one thing that we should never consider putting at threat. I'd say that late decision making, I can't echo it enough, really. We've seen it through to applications and the amount of actual confirmations after applications. And a recent UCAS, even, I know that's undergraduate, but the UCAS surveys show the difference between application and actually conversion. And so where are those students going? And clearly they are going to other countries if other countries have got more favourable conditions type thing. I think we need to be mindful of that. And so I echo Bobby for sure, in terms of we can see where other countries coming in with potentially different policies become more attractive in different spaces. We're aware of Australia now having skilled migration routes, and in many ways Canada, we don't have those forms of policies with our graduate route, and therefore it's not just the length, it's about the ease. And we also know that the graduate route isn't necessarily as easy, and some now that it's been rolled out for 2 years, we know that a number of students have going through it, and it's not quite so easy potentially as the old post-study work route. That's something for us to consider, whether we should consider it over the quality academic space. I would say that that's the one thing we need to hold on to and retain. The UK should always be seen as the global quality study destination above and beyond all else, and that will make us sustainable. I think the third point, I guess, is that kind of that late in decision making. Beyond campaigning, beyond what we can do to get the messages out to people, beyond what the policies are, we've also got to make sure that we're working with the agents and counsellors that coach those students through that decision. So, you know, when news hits the headlines, when Australia launches something that might look more favourable, or there's potentially a negative story about a safety issue in another country study destination, we are able to kind of continue to hold the hands of those students and coach them through to making decisions around coming to the UK if the UK is the right choice for that scholar. And I think that's a position that the British Council is now trying to position itself in, is by working with those agents and counsellors to give them the right information about the UK, to give them the right data about the UK, to make sure that student experience is protected. And things like the accommodation crisis that we've had this year, all these things would have had some kind of impact on how the UK is seen as a study destination for that safety, for that security, for that welcoming message, for that ease. And it's about how we come together to respond to some of the challenges. But yeah, no, thank you. I think the report is fantastic. It's good to see it. I didn't come to the conference last week, so I felt a little bit kind of in the dark, but it's really nice to see it, and I welcome this discussion.
No, thank you, Jacqui. And I think good to know that Study UK is focusing on the right areas from what students are saying is important. I guess the real question is whether we've got the evidence to then back up those messages, as you say, given some of the uncertainties. And then also, how do we ensure that they are recognised by prospective students as well, and that they trust what we're telling them? And I think within that presentation, there's certainly some challenging messages, but also some opportunities. I did just want to pick up something that Jacqui, you've just raised, but I think Jonah covered in his presentation as well, about that kind of the improved offer to graduates in, for example, Australia, but also how different markets are maybe they will use what is being seen in other countries as the opportunity, for example, around accommodation crises, as a kind of promotional tool. How do you see that international environment evolving in terms of what's competitive from different stakeholders, and how do we respond as the UK? Jonah, I was wondering if I could come to you first, if there's anything from the data.
Just say what I didn't quite understand the question, Jamie. Sorry. What can you just give me one more time?
Yeah, sorry. I think both you and Jacqui referenced the fact that there is an increasingly competitive offer in places like Australia. So how do you see that evolving in the international environment? What is that competitive offer going to look like, and how do we respond as the UK?
Okay, thank you. So I think what you've got at the moment is you've got the most competitive sort of global offer that you've ever had. You've got Australia really bouncing back quite aggressively in terms of both their policy and, as importantly, their rhetoric. So I think you take that one. You've got the US as well, where interestingly, and I think the data that I presented around perception shows this, you've got a lot of positive rhetoric. They haven't necessarily got the policy to back that up, but you can see the rhetoric having a real impact on students' interest in studying in the US, and it becoming much more popular. And outside of this survey, you can see that in all of the IDP data that we have, both digital demand and through to applications. So I think there's an interesting one there around the role of rhetoric and what people are saying compared to the policy. And then in Canada, I think Canada is slightly different to the others in terms of its sort of two-track approach with both the college system and the university system. I think the college system has done incredibly well, especially from South Asia, continues to grow, continues to be very popular. But what you're seeing as well is those universities within Canada that aren't necessarily perceived possibly as being of high quality, but are beginning to wake up to the possibilities much more of international education. I would say one more point as well around Australia that doesn't hasn't necessarily come through in the presentation, but is there in the data, and that is that Australia is not perceived very highly for quality at the moment, and that's a perception, I would suggest, rather than a reality. So I think Australia will be looking at the same data that we are, and I would expect them to react to that and try to put out more positive messages around the quality of education to try to compete in that space as well.
No, thank you. And I think certainly that point around sort of aligning the policy and the rhetoric seems to be a sort of a really strong lesson. But Bobby, any reflections from your perspective?
Yeah, so I think when we're looking at the policy environment, for example, around post-study work opportunities, Australia definitely ramped it up with their offer. I don't necessarily think we need to compete like for like. That's not necessarily the answer. And I think, again, in the data, what it showed is actually the opportunities that we actually create in the UK. I think there's a lot of work, as Jonah reflected on, for the sector to do with industries to make sure prospective employers understand the graduate route and therefore are willing to take on students. I think rather than potentially even expanding or extending the current offer in terms of the UK's post-study work options, it may be the transition could be a lot simpler, and therefore the UK can improve in some of those indicators that were in the survey. Because if universities are helping graduates into employment, if employers are actually willing and able and understand the opportunities they have with the graduate route and what that offers, and then the transition from the graduate route to other employment routes within the UK is seamless, I think that itself would all hold together. And then it comes back, it does that 360, and it's no longer rhetoric, it's reality. You know, it's actually what we're delivering. So I think actually as we go forward, we can focus on that. But what we're having at the moment, and the rhetoric examples are quite interesting, that the rhetoric actually coming out of the UK globally at the moment is quite negative. And there's a negative rhetoric. So whilst we have the right policy environment, the rhetoric is not necessarily helping our position, whereas the policy environment, particularly in Australia, and the rhetoric is all very, very positive. So yeah, it is a really worrying time, but a time where I think we can collectively work together at sector level with government, as we did, and we've shown in the past, particularly the pandemic is a fantastic example of that. We work together, and it's not about changing it dramatically in terms of what we currently offer, but that joined up approach and working together and being very aware of the messages that we are conveying in the UK do go global. So how do we work with the likes of the British Council in making sure the right messages are amplified globally and not the ones that don't help us?
No, thank you. And I think that segues quite nicely into the next question I wanted to ask, and probably directed towards Jacqui as well. So as a sector and as a community, what more can we do collectively to promote the UK? And what are the kinds of messages that the British Council is able to push out to counter some of that potentially negative rhetoric?
So I think consistency is always the line. I think it's really good that we do have proof points. So when we talk about the quality badge, then there's a debate to be had about the rankings and the quality of teaching, and I understand those debates, but in that global space, the UK fares really well in the rankings of UK in international institutions. I think we've got 2 in the top 4, 26 in the top 100, and so on. So these are kind of facts that can really help embed that quality message, that it would be hard for Australia and other countries to compete with some of this, and we need to hold on to some of this and find those proof points, help those agents and counsellors understand the proof points. I think there's that word promotion. I find it quite difficult, to be honest, Jamie. I think we don't want to be promoting the UK. We won't be offering 2-for-1 degrees, etc., and doing promotions about the UK. We want the UK to be a really desirable study destination. And in order to do that, we've got to really make sure that international students that choose the UK, those that currently choose the UK, have that successful experience and are therefore able to be ambassadors of the UK, and that virtuous circle starts to happen. Now, within that space, I totally agree with Bobby. There's a duty for institutions to work with employers and to make sure that graduate route and opportunities are there and they're maximised, and those scholars can then go on to do some amazing things and become ambassadors of the UK. Our part, the British Council, I think more so now than ever, and we're lucky we've got the Study UK campaign, and there's a lot that we can do with the Study UK campaign. But our part now is to try and support all of those that influence international scholars on the ground in country, to have those messages, to understand the UK system, to see how to navigate the UK as a study destination, to help empower those students make decisions based on their individual interests. Now, looking at our data, we know that the majority of inquiries from Nigeria are related. I mean, I think about 74% are related to post-study work opportunities. It's only 17% in Turkey. So we have to amend our messages depending on what the market, and again, I don't know that word either, but depending on the country in which we're working with and the citizens of that country, their potential students and their lifelong careers, and how the UK can actually play an important part in being a force for good within that space, and ensure that international education at large is a force for good type thing to improve international student prospects. So I think that, like I say, I'll go back to that point before, we can't lose that quality badge. That we can't, right? That's the one thing we've all got to come together and retain. Whatever happens, whatever we do moving forward, we cannot risk losing that, because that gives us a uniqueness that pretty much the Australians and Canadians would love to have that. And I know that we don't fare so well in some of those other metrics, but we're doing exceedingly well in that space. And that isn't so much led by current policies, as it were. That's long-standing relationships, that's long-standing offer of our system of higher education, whatever the rhetoric coming out of some of the government and whatever the newspapers look like. You've got something there that I think other countries are envious of. And like I say, the next bit is to make sure we embed those messages with those that are continuing to work with students. IDP do fantastic work all over the world, and it was amazing to see so many Nigerians responding to your data. I was like, oh wow, that's intake now coming on board, you know. And but when we break this down a bit, I think we do need to tailor it. Yes, it's a global industry, but actually we need to localize it. And we saw when we lost the post-study work visa that actually it didn't have so much of an impact on China. It didn't have so much of an impact on Indonesia or majority of the GCC countries, because a lot of those countries are sending scholarships to the UK, and therefore the post-study work visa wasn't so relevant. So if we take the Indonesian data out of it, it probably looks a little bit different to the Nigerian data. How we have those bilateral relations with those global promises, with those global kind of proof points, the reputation, etc., is important, and then how we localize it is important, but we need to tailor it to the countries. And really, Jamie, it's to the individual student and making it sure that the UK is the right quality study destination for that individual student, so that student has a successful experience and goes on to then embed our quality kite mark type thing.
No, thank you. So really having those sort of tailored, targeted messages as far as possible. And I think one of the benefits of having this kind of rich data set is that it does allow us to start thinking through students from different countries, what might actually work for them and actually what they're valuing in terms of their to make their decisions. And actually, Bobby, if I could just sort of come to you, from an institutional point of view, what do you think that what are the key things that students want to see and hear from you from individual universities?
Yeah, so before I answer that question, Jamie, just add something to what Jacqui is saying. What I also think, though, is when students, regardless of the countries they're coming from, it's not one reason that they choose a country. So there is a package of reasons, and what we as so we've got quality and we've got bags of it, and we need to retain it. I completely agree with that. But the other components of the puzzle to make us, when they're making that final decision, if quality is okay with us, but the other 3 or 4 factors are a plus point for other study destinations, that may be the tipping point where they choose the other study destination. So I think we definitely need to do work at that sort of level. And I think one of the key things in that sort of space is the message that we amplify as a country about being welcoming, about being open, wanting to attract the best and the brightest students, all of those types of things. And I think that is missing at the moment in this particular point in time for the UK in comparison to the other destinations, and that's something we would definitely need to do and work to try and get that back in some shape or form. In terms of individual institutions, Jacqui reflected on some of the things that we've heard over the last 12 months. I think also you did, Jamie, in terms of the accommodation issues in the UK, capacity issues, etc. So I think what we as individual institutions need to take responsibility for and really own is making sure that we're planning, that we're doing things in a responsible way, that our targets are, that we've set for our international student recruitment are responsible, and that we can actually cater for the students that are coming through, that we could therefore ensure exactly what Jacqui is saying around that quality piece, that we give the best student experience, etc. So that, I think, is definitely one thing, making sure that if we've got X number of international students coming through, that we have X number of rooms available in accommodation. And if we don't have those rooms available in accommodation, then we should be adjusting our international targets and aims accordingly. You know, so I think we can definitely justify it for a year that sort of caught us as a surprise, etc. But I think we've got to be seen to be learning from those lessons as we go forward. In the immediate moments right now, we're in cycle. I think as I speak to colleagues and friends across the sector, different institutions, you know, application numbers are all-time high from international. There's, you know, application numbers have grown on this time last year, which is positive, it's great. But there is an issue of conversion. Conversion is not necessarily as quick or as we would expect or hope in that way. So there is something going on around students' decision making. Now, is it some of the factors that the IDP survey has alluded to around other study destinations bouncing back? Are students nervous because the UK hasn't come out and said, this is our policy long-term on the graduate route, or this is our policy on welcoming international students to the UK? You know, so is there nervousness? When I speak to colleagues on the ground in country, they say to me, students are nervous about it. They're not sure, you know, will a change come soon? And then when you speak again to government colleagues, etc., they're not able to give you a firm, categoric, this is what's happening. And that sort of nervousness then plays out into decision making. So I think at this point in the cycle, that is really having an impact, and we've got to look at that and see what we can do. And then I think as we move to the sort of medium to long term, it's again from an individual institutions or institutional perspectives, it's that nervousness about how do we plan in this sort of world where, you know, we're not sure what the policy environment's going to be. You know, there's lots going on in the domestic context, how that's going to play out. There is a lot of uncertainty, and therefore for institutions in terms of planning, with the backdrop of all the domestic issues, which I won't go into, which is a whole day's conference rather than a 1 hour webinar. It makes university planning and decision making about what it does in the coming sort of 12 to 24 months, let alone beyond that, very, very difficult.
No, thank you. And as you say, I think if we attempt to try and sort all of the domestic challenges in higher education, I think we'll be here for much longer than the next 13 minutes. But I think the really key point that you made there is that word that Keck probably got, responsibility. So actually having a very responsible approach to recruitment and understanding our responsibilities to students as well that are making choices but are already studying here. And I think that then links back to what Jacqui said. It's about making sure that the UK is the right choice and that we're then delivering on that promise as well. And yeah, I guess that's both an individual but also a collective responsibility across the sector as well. Again, going back to that point, reputation is hard won, easily lost. And so we all need to be taking that very seriously. We do have a question from a delegate, Eleanor, and I think this is for you, Jonah, around there's recognition that quality is really important, and in those final slides that you identified, there are many different sort of facets to quality. But from your data in the survey, is there any more sort of insights or information that you can share on what elements students consider when they think about quality, and actually what's the most important thing to them when they're judging the quality of an individual's institution, but also of a system?
Yeah, the beauty of being on a webinar and at a desk was I saw that come in. I've beavered away. I can get it out. Yes, globally. Start again. We asked the students what were the most important factors when they were researching high quality education, and globally the top three in order of importance. So number one was the graduate employment rate, and number two was the institution ranking, and number three was actually the cost of the tuition fees. Then we had facilities, and then we had the quality of academic staff. So that complexity and that sort of like, you know, almost like a Venn diagram of graduate employment opportunities or graduate employment rate and quality, that bit in the middle is where students are trying to find the sweet spot. For the UK though, it's just slightly different. So rather than it being the graduate employment rate that is the #1 way in which they assess quality, they're using institution rankings. So those, just to be really clear, those students who've got UK as their #1 study destination are saying they're assessing that quality using rankings, then graduate employment rate, then quality of academic staff. So that's the top 3 for the UK. So yeah, just I think it probably complicates things even more, but just shows what a complex decision-making process it is.
I think that's one of our messages as well,
Jacqui.
Jamie. One of the messages, within the Study UK, or the proof points, 1 in 3 of undergraduate students in the UK receive a first-class degree. Now that means that includes domestic and international students, but some of this kind of, that's a good success rate. 1 in 3 undergraduate students receive a first-class degree. Is something that international students value too. So yes, there is a little, of course, that then leads on to employment, but there's the rankings that's out there, but it's also as an individual, my chances are quite good if I study in the UK. I'm likely to succeed within the UK. That's also important for us to remember.
No, thank you. And Bobby, how does that play out at the institutional level as well? Is this what the students are asking you when your team are on education fairs and dealing with inquiries from students individually?
Yeah, look, usually when students are looking to the UK or talking to individual institutions, they're very interested in the course. What courses do you have? And usually when they look at the courses, they then want to know about the opportunities within that course. What will I study? And similar to what the IDP data shows, they start pointing towards where will this lead me? In a lot of countries, it is about the return on that investment of money, time, energy, effort to go halfway around the world and resettle somewhere else for a year or more. So yeah, there's a lot of focus around that. And what the UK and UK institutions are very, very good at is being at the forefront of research, of developments. And what you will see if you look at the portfolio of master's programs, for example, the institutions, they're offering the latest courses, the latest types of education that will enable students to be ready for the workforce of tomorrow. So, right now, data science, AI, all of those types of things are both of interest to prospective students, and the UK has it and has bags of it and bags of expertise. Cyber security, all the buzzwords that we hear in the news. UK universities are doing research in that. UK universities are then developing programs in those areas. So that, again, when you're talking to prospective students, really does help in terms of getting that and building on that sort of image and background of being a quality study destination, that we can really show that. So, collectively, I think UK universities individually and as a collective have a very positive story to tell as far as all of that goes. And it really does hold true, because you can see it. It's in prospectuses. It's been taught in classrooms up and down the country.
No, thank you. And we just got one final sort of question from people who joined us, Laura. And I think this is again for you, Jonah. But in terms of graduate outcomes, do you get a sense of whether students are talking about getting a job in the UK, or is it getting employment in their home country, or is it both?
We didn't ask that specific or those specific questions in this survey, but we have in quite recent previous surveys. And so what you see for the UK is around about a third of students saying they want to stay in the UK to work. And we see slightly high numbers when we did that survey for Canada, but for the UK it's around about a third. Yeah, there's a lot that want to stay, and then the others are either going on to further study or to work back in their home country. The other part of the question is around whether students want to know if they can get a job. And whilst the question wasn't asked directly, we did ask students what factors would make them reassess their initial first choice to think about different destinations. We asked that question about a year ago, and one of the key findings was a guaranteed job after graduation. So if students would think very differently about where they would study if they knew they could get a job, and by that get return on investment on their education, and that would really influence their decision making.
No, thank you, Jonah. And we're approaching the end now, but I think I have one more question that I do want to ask of everyone, but on the panel. So maybe maximum 30 seconds. We have spoken about rhetoric and policy uncertainty. If there is one thing you could ask of the government, what would it be? Jacqui first.
I'm not allowed to ask anything of the government, Jamie. That's breaking my rules. I'm government funded. No. So what I think the government could keep is going to be the same thing. I think we need to make sure that whatever we do, we retain that quality and that reputation as a good study destination, as a quality study destination. And I would, whatever we do within that space, that can't be lost. Second bit, if I'm okay to add to it, is some level of consistency. I definitely think all the time that things are changing. We need to reassure scholars that if they make a decision now, they're going to be offered and honoured what they thought they were making their decision on. And that is important. If we cannot commit, then that makes all decision making very, very difficult.
No, thank you. Jonah, if there was one thing of government, what would you ask?
I think I'd echo some of what Jacqui said. I think students are looking for certainty. So I think that would probably be the one ask in 30 seconds that I would put forward.
No, thank you. And Bobby, final word to you.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with everything that's been said. I would say certainty, consistency, and being positive about the UK and us being seen as global Britain that wants to work with the world, and being mindful that the domestic politics, domestic discussions, particularly for the UK being a global player, plays out globally.
No, I think that's an excellent point to end on. I think we sometimes forget, or certainly some people seem to forget, that people overseas, they do read what's in the media, and that we're saying about our own systems as well. And I think that is a really, really important point. So, Luke, we're almost at the end of the session. So thank you to our panelists for a really kind of insightful discussion, and for Jonah for sharing the latest data from the Emerging Futures series. I think it's quite clear there's a huge amount to celebrate about the UK's international offer, and the way in which we are perceived as a really, really high quality system. And that is absolutely our USP. And as Jacqui said, that is the one thing we absolutely have to maintain and be able to shout about really, really proudly. But there are kind of concerns and risks on the horizon, and we probably need to be doing more to engage students, ensure that we're delivering on our promises to them, and that we're offering that kind of stability and certainty. And I think that really comes through as a sort of a key message for government as well. So there is plenty to do, but also a huge opportunity. So thank you again to our panel, Jonah Duffin from IDP, Bobby Mehta from University of Portsmouth and Wheeler, and Jacqui Jenkins from the British Council. And of course, thank you to everyone who's joined us today on the webinar. Do the count for our autumn event on International Student Recruitment 2023. I think it's on the screen now, 19th of October, and where we'll be able to have these conversations, but in much more depth and over more than an hour. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and have a great afternoon. Thank you.